The doors were supposed to open 11 minutes ago. I stood at the altar with my hands clasped in front of me, trying to look calm, while 200 people shifted in their seats behind me. If you've ever been blindsided by the people you trusted most, stay with me, because this story only gets worse before it gets better. Comment family betrayal verdict if you're ready for the truth. She's just running late, Tom whispered beside me, adjusting his cufflinks for the third time. Brides are always late. I nodded, but my chest didn't believe him. Emily was never late. She color-coded her calendar. She showed up 15 minutes early to everything, including our first date, standing outside the restaurant in the cold rather than risk keeping me waiting. The coordinator, a small woman named Patricia with a headset and a clipboard, appeared at the side door and caught my eye. She didn't smile. That was the first thing that told me something was wrong. Patricia had been smiling since 7 that morning, fussing over boutonnieres and seating charts with an energy that made the whole day feel like it was running exactly the way it should. Mr. Bennett, she said quietly, stepping close enough that only I could hear. Can I speak with you for just a moment? Is she okay? My voice cracked on the second word. I don't have all the details yet. I just know the bride hasn't arrived. The room behind me had gone from restless to silent, and silence in a church that sighs feels like pressure against your eardrums. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear the air conditioning humming somewhere above the altar, and beneath that, the faint rustle of programs being fanned against the summer heat pressing through the stained glass windows. Then the back doors burst open, and it wasn't Emily. It was Sophie. Her mascara had run down one cheek in a thin black line, and her heels clicked too fast against the marble as she practically ran down the aisle toward me, ignoring the 200 faces turning to watch her. James! She grabbed both my hands before I could step back. Her fingers were freezing, colder than the room had any right to make them. James, I need to talk to you. Not here. Please, not here. Sophie, where is she? I kept my voice low, but my fingers tightened around hers without meaning to. Where's Emily? She's not coming, James. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to be the one to tell you. The words landed like something physical. A weight dropped straight into my sternum. I heard someone in the third row gasp. Someone else whispered to the person beside them, and the whisper spread backward through the pews like a wave moving through still water. What do you mean, she's not coming? I asked. Sophie, look at me. Where is she right now? There was car trouble. Her car wouldn't start and then... Sophie stopped herself, her eyes darting somewhere over my shoulder, toward the doors, toward anywhere that wasn't my face. It's complicated. Car trouble. I repeated it flatly. You ran down the aisle crying because of car trouble? She didn't answer right away. Her hands were shaking in mine, and I realized I could feel her pulse hammering against my palm, quick and uneven, nothing like the composed maid of honor who'd toasted us both at the rehearsal dinner 2 nights earlier. Sophie. What aren't you saying? I promised her I wouldn't. Promise her what? Before she could answer, I heard my mother's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. She was already moving toward me from the front pew, her face pale under her makeup, one hand pressed to her collarbone the way she did whenever she was trying not to cry in public. James, honey, come sit down. Let's step to the side. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone standing very far away from this altar, watching all of this happen to a stranger in a rented tuxedo. That's when I heard Emily's aunt, a heavy-set woman named Carol who'd had 2 glasses of champagne before the ceremony even started, mutter to the woman beside her in a voice that carried further than she probably intended. Diane left the rehearsal dinner early last night. Said she had something important to handle. Diane. Emily's mother. I looked at Sophie, and something in her face changed the second that name reached her ears. It was small, a flinch, barely visible, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't already looking for cracks. But I was looking. I'd been looking since the doors didn't open on time, since Patricia's smile disappeared, since the whole morning started sliding sideways in ways I couldn't yet name. Sophie. My voice came out steadier now, quieter, more dangerous than I intended. What does Diane have to do with any of this? Nothing. I don't. James, please, can we just talk somewhere private? You keep saying that. Somewhere private. Like there's something you're afraid 200 people are going to hear. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Behind her, I could see guests starting to stand, gathering purses and jackets, the wedding already dissolving into whispered theories before anyone had told me a single fact I could hold on to. My hands had gone cold despite the heat, despite the tuxedo jacket suddenly feeling 3 sizes too heavy on my shoulders. I thought about the pier in Charleston 18 months ago, the way Emily's hands had trembled when I got down on one knee, the way she'd said yes before I'd even finished the question, laughing through tears while a stranger walking his dog stopped to clap for us. None of that matched the woman who couldn't be bothered to show up to her own wedding. Near the back of the church, I noticed 2 of Emily's bridesmaids whispering to each other, glancing my way and then quickly looking elsewhere. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Their expressions said enough, pity mixed with something else, something closer to knowing. My mother reached me then, her hand settling on my arm, gently trying to turn me away from the center aisle. Let's not do this here, sweetheart. Please. I need to understand what's happening, Mom. I know. But not like this. Not in front of everyone. I let her guide me a few steps toward the side vestibule, mostly because arguing took more energy than I had left. Behind us, I heard the 2 bridesmaids near the 3rd pew still whispering, not quietly enough. I heard he still owes on part of the venue, one of them murmured. Maybe she just realized what she was walking into. Poor guy doesn't even know yet, the other replied, and something in her tone wasn't sympathy. It was closer to amusement. I turned my head just enough to catch their eyes. They both looked away fast, but neither one looked sorry. Tom appeared at my side a moment later, phone in hand, jaw tight in a way I'd rarely seen from him. James, I found Emily's phone. It was on the vanity in the bridal suite. Nobody thought to grab it when everyone cleared out. Give it to me. James. Give it to me, Tom. He handed it over without another word. The screen was still unlocked, glowing faintly against my palm, and the first thing I saw was a text thread still open at the top, a conversation between Emily and someone saved simply as Mom. I read the last message before Sophie snatched the phone out of my hands, her fingers fast and desperate. Tell him whatever you need to, just don't let him see the transfer. Sophie. My voice had gone very quiet, quieter than anything I'd said since the doors failed to open. What transfer? It's not what it looks like. She clutched the phone to her chest like it might bite her, her breath coming fast and shallow. James, please, you're not thinking clearly right now. This is a lot to process, and I don't think you should be reading things out of context. Out of context. I laughed, but there was no humor in it, just something sharp and disbelieving that scraped its way out of my throat. Sophie, her mother told her to hide something from me on our wedding day. What context makes that okay? She didn't answer. She just stood there in the vestibule doorway, mascara streaked and trembling, holding a secret I could feel pressing against the space between us like something alive. Somewhere behind me, the last of the guests were filing out of the church, their voices low, their glances lingering just a moment too long before they looked away. I stood there in my tuxedo, ring still on my finger, staring at a woman who clearly knew far more than car trouble, and understood, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in my chest, that whatever had happened to Emily that morning, it wasn't an accident. And Sophie was going to tell me everything, one way or another, no matter how long it took to pull it out of her. The side vestibule smelled like candle wax and old wood, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than the silence in the main church had been. My mother hovered near the doorway, unsure whether to stay or give us space, until I gave her a small nod and she stepped back into the hallway. Sophie sank onto a wooden bench against the wall, Emily's phone still clutched in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Sophie, look at me. I crouched down slightly so we were eye level. I saw the message. Whatever this transfer is, I need to know. You don't understand what you're asking me to do. Her voice shook. If I tell you and I'm wrong about what it means, I could ruin everything for no reason. You're not wrong about it meaning something. I already know that much. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, smearing what was left of her mascara into a gray streak along her temple. I promised Emily I'd give her time to explain this herself. She's not here to explain anything, Sophie. She left me standing at an altar in front of 200 people. I think that forfeits her right to control how I find out. Tom appeared in the doorway then, phone still in his hand, his expression tight. James. I checked the parking lot. Emily's car is gone. It's not sitting somewhere with a dead battery. It's just gone. So there was no car trouble. There was no car trouble, he confirmed. Sophie flinched at that, her shoulders curling inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. You lied to me, I said quietly. Right there, in front of everyone. You looked me in the eye and lied. I didn't know what else to say. Her voice cracked, rising sharply enough that my mother glanced back in from the hallway. Everyone was staring, James. I panicked. I said the first thing that came into my head. And the transfer? Did you panic into that too, or did you already know about it? She didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything her words hadn't yet. Sophie. I kept my voice low, controlled, even though everything in me wanted to shout. Please. I only know pieces. She finally said, her voice dropping to something closer to a whisper. Diane's been managing some of the wedding finances. The joint account you and Emily set up, I know there was some kind of withdrawal. I don't know the amount. I don't know why. When did you find out? Last night. After the rehearsal dinner. Emily called me crying, saying her mother had done something and she didn't know how to fix it before today. And instead of telling me, you decided the best plan was to let me stand at that altar not knowing any of this. I thought she was going to tell you herself. I thought she'd at least call you before the ceremony, explain everything, cancel it properly instead of just. Sophie's voice broke off entirely, tears spilling freely now. Instead of just disappearing. I stood up and walked to the small window in the vestibule, staring out at the parking lot where guests were slowly filing toward their cars, their conversations muted through the glass but their body language unmistakable. Whispers. Glances back toward the church. The particular kind of energy that spreads through a crowd when they've just witnessed something they'll be talking about for months. I need to see my bank account, I said, mostly to myself. James, wait. Sophie stood, reaching toward me before catching herself. Please don't do anything before Emily has a chance to explain. This isn't as simple as it looks. You keep telling me that. It's not as simple as it looks. But every single thing I've learned in the last 20 minutes makes it look exactly as simple as it is. My fiancée and her mother did something with our shared money, and instead of telling me, everyone decided the better plan was to let me humiliate myself in front of everyone we know. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Sophie. She had no response to that. I watched something shift in her face, not quite guilt, not quite defiance, something caught uncomfortably between the two. My mother stepped back into the room, her expression carefully composed the way it always was when she was holding herself together for my sake rather than her own. James, Patricia says the venue needs the room cleared within the hour for the reception setup they've got scheduled tonight. I know that's the last thing you want to think about right now. Of course they do. I let out a short, humorless breath. Life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. Do you want me to handle the guests? Start letting people know there won't be a reception? Yeah. I rubbed a hand over my face, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones despite the fact that the day had barely started. Tell them whatever makes sense. I don't have the energy to explain anything right now. She nodded and stepped back out, already reaching for her phone. I turned back to Sophie. I need your honest word on something, and I need you to actually give it to me this time. Do you know where Emily is right now? Sophie hesitated, and in that hesitation, I understood the answer before she gave it. I have an idea. she admitted quietly. I don't know for certain. But I think she might be at her mother's house. Diane's house. Yes. I pulled out my own phone and opened my banking app with hands that weren't entirely steady. It took a moment to load, the small spinning wheel on the screen feeling like it stretched into an eternity. Then the notification appeared. Unusual activity detected on your joint account. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen before I finally tapped through to the transaction history. $40,000. Withdrawn that morning, hours before the ceremony was supposed to start. Our wedding fund, the money we'd spent 2 years building together for the down payment on the house we were supposed to move into after the honeymoon. Gone. $40,000. I said out loud, my voice flat with disbelief. Sophie's face went pale. I didn't know it was that much. You knew there was a withdrawal and you didn't think that was worth telling me before I put on a tuxedo and walked down an aisle? I told you, I only knew pieces. Emily didn't give me details, she just said her mother had handled something that needed to happen before today. Before today. The words settled into place with a horrible kind of clarity. Whatever this was, it hadn't been a spontaneous decision made in a moment of panic. It had needed to happen before the wedding, which meant someone had been planning around a deadline. I need you to give me something real, Sophie. Not pieces. Not half explanations. If you know anything else, I need it now. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, the confident, put-together maid of honor from the rehearsal dinner completely gone. There's a name I've heard a few times over the last couple months. Emily mentioned meeting with someone for what she called business stuff with her mom. A man. I think his name was Marcus. Marcus who? I don't know his last name. I'm sorry, James, I really don't. Tom, still standing near the doorway, spoke up quietly. I might. I saw Emily outside the church a few weeks back, talking to a guy in an expensive suit. I didn't think anything of it at the time, figured he worked for the venue or the caterer. But I remember hearing someone call him Whitfield. Marcus Whitfield. I didn't recognize the name, but something about hearing it out loud, paired with the missing $40,000 and Diane's cryptic text message, made my stomach twist into something cold and unfamiliar. I looked down at my hand, the wedding band Emily and I had picked out together sitting on my finger, suddenly feeling like the heaviest thing I'd ever worn. I worked it off slowly, the metal catching slightly against my knuckle before sliding free, and held it in my closed fist. James! Sophie's voice was barely audible. I really am sorry. I didn't want any of this to happen the way it did. I believe that you're sorry, I said quietly. I don't think that's the same as being honest. Not yet, anyway. She flinched at that, but didn't argue. I pocketed the ring, pulled out my phone, and opened a blank note, my hands steadier now than they had any right to be given everything that had just unraveled in the span of 20 minutes. $40,000. Withdrawn this morning. Diane's text. Don't let him see the transfer. Marcus Whitfield. Connection unknown. Emily possibly at Diane's house. It wasn't much. But it was a start, and for the first time since Patricia's smile had disappeared at that side door, I felt something steadier take hold beneath the shock, a quiet, cold determination that I intended to follow every single one of these threads until I understood exactly what had happened to my wedding, my money, and the woman I thought I'd known for 3 years. I didn't go home after the church. I drove straight to Rachel's office instead, still in my tuxedo, the jacket thrown across the passenger seat because I couldn't stand the weight of it against my shoulders anymore. Rachel had been my lawyer friend since law school, sharp enough that clients waited months for her availability, and she was the only person I trusted enough to hear all of this without flinching or offering hollow sympathy I didn't need yet. She opened her office door in weekend clothes, clearly not expecting me, her expression shifting from confusion to concern the moment she saw my face. James? What happened? Where's Emily? She never showed up. My voice came out rougher than I intended. $40,000 is missing from our account, and I think her mother is involved. Rachel didn't ask another question. She just stepped aside and let me in. I laid everything out for her at her kitchen table: the withdrawal, Diane's text message, Sophie's half explanations, the name Marcus Whitfield that neither of us recognized yet. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with every detail. "If that withdrawal happened without your authorization," she said finally, "and if both signatures were required for a transfer of that size, this isn't just a broken engagement, James. This could be fraud." Fraud. The word felt strange in my mouth, too formal for something that had gutted me so personally just hours earlier. "I need to see the account agreement." "But if the bank's terms required both your signatures for anything over a certain threshold, and only one signature appears on this transaction, you have real legal standing here. What do I do first?" "Document everything. Every message, every call, every screenshot. Timestamps matter more than you'd think if this ever needs to hold up formally." I spent the rest of that afternoon at her kitchen table, screenshotting the bank alert, forwarding the transaction history to my own email, and recording a voice memo summarizing the entire morning while it was still fresh enough to be accurate. My voice sounded strange on the recording, flat and controlled in a way that didn't match how I actually felt. Tom called around 6 that evening, his voice different than it had been at the church, less shaken, more focused. "I did some digging," he said. "Marcus Whitfield isn't just some random guy in a suit. He's a real estate developer. Does a lot of commercial projects downtown. What would a real estate developer want with Emily? That's the thing. I don't think this is about Emily specifically." Tom paused. "I think it might be about Diane. I remember hearing something a while back. Diane's been trying to break into commercial property development for years but never had the capital or the right connections. Whitfield has both." Something cold settled into my chest, the pieces beginning to align into a shape I didn't want to look at directly. "You think Diane arranged all of this? Not just this morning. The wedding itself?" "I don't know for certain. But the timing feels too convenient to be coincidence." My phone buzzed with a call from Sophie before I could respond to Tom. I almost let it go to voicemail. I answered anyway. "James, please don't do anything before you hear the full story," she said immediately, her voice tight with urgency. "I know how all of this looks." "How does it look, Sophie?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like Emily's mother arranged for a wedding to collapse so she could quietly drain $40,000 from an account I trusted her daughter with. She didn't want any of this, James. You have to believe that. Diane's controlled every part of Emily's life for years, the money, the family reputation, even where she's allowed to work. You don't understand what it's like living under someone like that. I'm not asking you to defend Emily's choices, Sophie. I'm asking you to tell me the truth, all of it, without the excuses built in. I am telling you the truth." "No. You're telling me a version of the truth that makes you feel less responsible for helping hide it from me for as long as you did." Silence stretched across the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "I have to go," she said finally, her voice barely audible, and the line went dead before I could push further. I sat there with the phone still against my ear, listening to nothing, feeling the particular exhaustion that comes from chasing half-truths all day without landing on anything solid. Rachel, who'd been quietly working on her laptop across the table, looked up. "You need to eat something. And sleep, if you can manage it. Tomorrow we start building this properly." I nodded, though sleep felt like a distant, almost theoretical concept. Around 8 that night, I finally went home, the apartment eerily quiet without Emily's things scattered across the counters the way they usually were during a normal week. I noticed, for the first time, how much of the space had already been rearranged in preparation for boxes that were never coming: empty shelves near the door, a stack of flattened moving boxes leaning against the hallway closet that I hadn't asked for. My neighbor Frank knocked a few minutes later, holding 2 beers, clearly having heard some version of the day's events from someone in the building already. "Rough one, huh?" he said, handing me a beer without waiting for permission. "You could say that." "Hey, probably nothing," But I saw a moving truck outside Emily's building 2 days ago. Big one, guys carrying out furniture, boxes, the works. Didn't think much of it until I heard what happened at the church today. I stared at him, the beer suddenly forgotten in my hand. A moving truck. 2 days ago. Yeah. Blocked half the street for almost an hour. Figured maybe she was rearranging furniture or something, but now that you mention all this. She was already moving out. I said slowly, mostly to myself. Before the wedding even happened. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in a moment of panic at the altar. This had been planned, coordinated, executed with a level of precision that made the whole morning feel less like heartbreak and more like an operation I'd unknowingly walked straight into. I thanked Frank, closed the door, and stood alone in my kitchen for a long time, my tuxedo jacket still draped over a chair where I'd left it hours earlier. I thought about the apartment Emily and I were supposed to move into together next month, the one with the bay window she'd loved so much she'd taken photos of it from 3 different angles before we'd even signed anything. I thought about the paint colors we picked out together on a Sunday afternoon, arguing playfully over 2 nearly identical shades of blue. None of that would happen now. The lease we'd almost signed sat somewhere in a folder on my laptop, another casualty of whatever this actually was. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Found something. Call me first thing tomorrow. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through everything I'd learned since the church doors failed to open, the withdrawal, Diane's message, Marcus Whitfield, the moving truck, Sophie's half-truths stacking up into something that felt less like a broken engagement and more like a carefully executed exit. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I got up and pulled out my laptop, opening the folder where I'd started saving screenshots and documents earlier that day. I added everything I'd learned that evening, Tom's information about Whitfield, Frank's account of the moving truck, the timestamp of Sophie's call, and everything she'd admitted and avoided admitting. It wasn't enough yet. But it was becoming something. Truth doesn't stay buried forever, and if you want to see exactly how deep this goes, stay with me, because we're only getting started. Whatever Diane, Emily, and Marcus Whitfield had built together, however carefully they'd planned the timing of it all, I intended to trace every single thread back to its source, no matter how long it took or how much of myself I had to rebuild once I finally understood the whole picture. Rachel's office had transformed overnight into something resembling a small investigation headquarters, folders spread across her desk, sticky notes marking dates and names on a whiteboard she'd apparently borrowed from somewhere in the building. Sit, she said the moment I walked in, gesturing to the chair across from her. I found something in the account agreement I want you to see. I sat, still running on almost no sleep, a coffee from the shop downstairs doing very little to cut through the exhaustion pressing behind my eyes. Your joint account required both signatures for any withdrawal over $25,000, Rachel said, sliding the document toward me. This withdrawal was $40,000. That means whoever processed it either forged your authorization or found a way around the requirement entirely. Which would mean, at minimum, we're looking at fraud. Possibly forgery, depending on how it was executed. I want to request the bank's internal record showing exactly how this transaction was authorized. Do it, I said. Whatever you need. She nodded, already typing notes into her laptop. I also did some digging on Marcus Whitfield overnight. He's not just a developer. He's currently trying to close a major commercial property deal downtown, and from what I can find in public filings, he's been searching for local investment partners for the better part of a year. An investment partner like Diane? Possibly. I can't confirm that yet without more information, but the timeline is suspicious. If Diane needed capital to buy into that deal, and if she needed it fast, $40,000 might not have been the full amount, just a piece of something larger. I sat back, letting that settle, the picture growing wider and more deliberate with every new detail. This wasn't just about hurting me. I was barely a footnote in whatever Diane and Marcus Whitfield were actually building together. My phone buzzed with a message from an email address I didn't recognize immediately, until I saw the name attached. Sophie Brennan 88. The message was short. I need to talk to you. Not on the phone. Somewhere private, just us. I have things I should have told you already. S. I read it 3 times before showing it to Rachel. Be careful, she said, reading over my shoulder. If she's finally ready to talk, that's good, potentially very good for building this case. But don't record without telling her first. Depending on how this eventually gets used, an unauthorized recording could actually hurt us instead of helping. I'll ask her permission before I record anything. Good. And James? She paused, choosing her words carefully. Whatever she tells you, don't react in the moment. Listen. Write everything down as soon as you leave. We need this documented cleanly if it's going to matter later. I agreed, though staying controlled felt like an increasingly difficult promise to keep. I replied to Sophie, and she suggested meeting the following morning at a diner across town, somewhere neither of us would run into anyone from the wedding. That afternoon, while waiting for the meeting, I drove past the church almost without meaning to, some instinct pulling me back to the scene of everything that had unraveled less than 48 hours earlier. The parking lot sat empty except for a single maintenance truck, the building itself looking smaller and less significant than it had felt standing inside it. I called my mother from the parking lot, mostly needing to hear a voice that didn't feel tangled up in any of this. How are you holding up, sweetheart? Honestly, I don't really know yet. Still trying to piece together what actually happened. I ran into Carol yesterday, she said carefully. Emily's aunt. She mentioned something I probably should have told you sooner, but I wasn't sure if it mattered. What did she say? She said Diane's been under a lot of financial pressure the last year. Apparently she made some bad investments after your future father-in-law passed, lost quite a bit of the family's savings. Carol thinks that's part of why Diane's been so controlling about Emily's choices lately, trying to secure something stable before it's too late. I felt something shift slightly in my understanding, not softening what had happened, but adding another layer to why it might have happened this way. That doesn't excuse stealing from us, Mom. No, it doesn't. I just thought you should know the full picture, if there is one. I thanked her and hung up, sitting alone in the church parking lot a while longer before finally driving home. The diner the next morning was nearly empty, just an older couple in a corner booth and the smell of burnt coffee hanging heavy in the air. Sophie was already there when I arrived, sitting with both hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from, staring at the table like it might give her courage before I even sat down. Thank you for coming, she said. You said you had things to tell me. I'm listening. She took a long breath, the kind that shook slightly on the way out. Before I say anything else, I need you to know I hated every part of what happened yesterday. I want that on the record, even if it doesn't change anything now. Just tell me the truth, Sophie. That's all I actually want. Diane needed access to your joint account before the bank flagged anything unusual, she said, the words tumbling out faster now, like she'd been holding them back so long they built up pressure behind them. Emily was the only one with that access, since you two hadn't opened separate accounts yet before the wedding. Diane told her it was temporary, that everything could still happen once the transfer went through and the business situation with Marcus was settled. So the wedding disappearing wasn't really about Emily leaving me. It was cover for the money. The money was always the priority. If Emily had called off the wedding quietly beforehand, you might have started asking questions before the transfer cleared. But if she vanished on the actual day, in front of everyone, it looked like panic. Like heartbreak. Nobody questions a bride who runs from her own wedding, not right away. I felt something in my chest go very still, my mind working faster than my body could keep pace with. And Emily agreed to this. Knowingly. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She was terrified, James. Diane's controlled every part of her life for years, the money, the approval, even the idea of what kind of future she was allowed to want. Emily believed if she didn't go along with it, she'd lose her mother completely, on top of everything else she'd already lost. But you helped her lie to my face. At the altar. In front of 200 people. I know. Her voice cracked completely now. I've replayed your face from that moment every hour since it happened. I keep seeing it. I sat back, processing everything, the pieces finally slotting into a shape that made a horrible, coherent kind of sense. Diane hadn't just wanted her daughter married comfortably. She needed capital, and Marcus Whitfield had it, and our wedding fund had simply been the fastest, quietest route to access it before anyone could stop her. Does Diane know you're talking to me right now? Sophie shook her head quickly. No. And if she finds out, I lose everything. My own mother works for Diane's family business, James. If Diane finds out I talked, she won't just cut me out socially. She'll make sure my mother loses her job too. Then why are you telling me any of this? She looked at me for a long moment, something steadier finally settling into her expression despite the fear still shaking through her hands. Because staying quiet already cost me the one friendship I actually valued. I watched Emily become someone who thinks love is just a transaction, something you calculate instead of choose. I'm not losing my conscience on top of that. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder Rachel had prepared, printed timelines and blank statement forms ready for exactly this kind of moment. Would you be willing to write everything down? Sign it? Sophie's hands trembled around the mug. For a long moment I thought she might refuse, the risk finally outweighing whatever guilt had brought her here in the first place. Then she nodded slowly. Yes. I'll write all of it down. Something shifted in me in that moment, quiet but unmistakable, a kind of clarity replacing the exhaustion that had followed me since the church doors failed to open 2 days earlier. I wasn't just chasing fragments anymore. I was building something solid, methodical, with someone finally willing to stand beside the truth instead of protecting the people who'd used it against me. There's one more thing, Sophie said quietly, her voice dropping even further. Diane's hosting a fundraising gala this weekend. Big donors, business partners, people she's spent years trying to impress. Marcus is supposed to be there. I heard them mention finalizing the development partnership publicly, in front of everyone. I felt a plan begin to take shape, cold and clear, cutting cleanly through the fog that had followed me since Sophie first ran down that aisle 2 days earlier. Rachel had told me to document everything, to build this properly instead of reacting emotionally. But some truths, I was beginning to understand, needed the right room and the right audience before they could actually matter. Sophie signed the written statement 2 days later, her hand shaking slightly as she dated the top of the page in Rachel's office, the words she'd spoken at the diner now permanent, formal, impossible to take back. This changes everything, Rachel said, reading through it carefully before sliding it into a folder already thick with documentation. Combined with the bank records and the timeline we've built, this isn't just suspicious anymore, James. This is a coordinated pattern. What happens now? Now we verified the connection to Marcus Whitfield's development deal. If we can prove the withdrawn funds were funneled toward that partnership, it strengthens everything. It also gives us leverage beyond just the missing money. I nodded, though my mind kept circling back to something else Sophie had mentioned at the diner. The gala. Marcus and Diane finalizing their partnership publicly, in front of exactly the people Diane had spent years trying to impress. Rachel, what if we didn't handle this quietly? She looked up from her laptop, studying my face carefully. What are you thinking? Diane built her whole reputation on being respectable, trustworthy, the kind of person people wanted to do business with. If this comes out privately through lawyers, she finds a way to spin it. Blame Emily, blame circumstances, walk away with her reputation mostly intact. And if it comes out publicly? Then she doesn't get to control the story. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risk the way lawyers naturally do. It's aggressive, James. And it comes with real consequences if we're not airtight. But if the documentation holds up, and if Sophie's statement corroborates everything else we have, it could work. I want to do it at the gala. That's not a small decision. Once you do this in that kind of room, there's no controlling how it plays out afterward. I know. I don't want to control it. I want the truth to exist somewhere Diane can't quietly erase it. Rachel finally nodded, something like respect settling into her expression. Then let's make sure everything is bulletproof before Saturday. The next few days blurred into research and preparation. Rachel confirmed through public filings that Marcus Whitfield's development deal required a minimum capital investment of $200,000 from any local partner, an amount Diane hadn't possessed until recently, according to Carol's earlier comment about her financial struggles. $40,000 from our account wouldn't have covered that alone. Which meant either Diane had other sources, or she'd been assembling the capital from multiple places. Tom, still digging on his end, called Wednesday evening with something new. James, I talked to a guy I know who works in title records downtown. Diane took out a second mortgage on her house about 3 months ago. $60,000. Combined with our 40. I said slowly. That's $100,000. Still short of 200, but maybe enough to secure a smaller stake, or a promise of more capital coming. Enough to get her foot in the door anyway. I sat with that information for a long time after hanging up, the picture growing clearer and somehow more devastating with every new detail. Diane hadn't just made an impulsive, desperate choice. She'd been building toward this for months, mortgaging her own home, waiting for the right moment to access our account before anyone could stop her. Sophie called Thursday night, her voice tight with something I hadn't heard from her before. Fear, real and immediate. Diane knows I've been talking to you, she said without preamble. She confronted me tonight. Someone must have seen us at the diner. Are you okay? She threatened to tell my mother's employer I've been spreading lies. She said if I keep, quote, siding with James, she'll make sure my mother loses her position at the family business. James, that's my mother's entire career. She's worked there for 15 years. Sophie, I'm sorry. I never wanted this to cost you anything. I know. That's not why I'm calling. Her voice steadied slightly. I'm calling because being threatened like that made something very clear to me. Diane isn't afraid of consequences. She's only afraid of being caught before she's ready. Which means whatever you're planning, you need to do it before she has more time to cover her tracks. The gala is Saturday. Then Saturday needs to be enough. I spent Friday night at Rachel's office until nearly midnight, organizing everything into a single presentation: the bank statement, Diane's text message, Sophie's signed statement, the mortgage records Tom had uncovered, and a clear timeline connecting every piece to Marcus Whitfield's development deal. There's still a gap, Rachel said, studying the timeline. We can prove the money moved. We can prove Diane pressured Emily into concealment. But we don't have direct proof Marcus knew where the capital was coming from. Does that matter? It matters if you want this to hold up as fraud instead of just a family betrayal. If Marcus knowingly accepted funds he understood were obtained through concealment or coercion, that changes his exposure significantly. I thought about that for a long moment. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe Diane told him it was her own money, personal savings, nothing connected to my account at all. That's very possible. Rachel agreed. Which means when you expose this Saturday, in front of him and everyone else, you're not just exposing Diane. You might be handing Marcus information he doesn't currently have. Good, I said quietly. Then he can decide for himself whether he still wants to be part of it. Saturday morning, I sat alone at my kitchen table with the folder of evidence in front of me, my hands steadier than they'd been in days. I thought about the pier in Charleston, the ring I still carried in my pocket rather than wearing, the version of myself who knelt there 18 months earlier so certain that love was something simple. For the first time since the church doors failed to open, I stopped feeling like a victim waiting for someone else to explain what had happened to me. I was the one holding the truth now. And tonight, in a room full of exactly the people Diane had spent her whole life trying to impress, I intended to make sure everyone finally saw it too. The gala was being held in a glass-walled ballroom downtown, the kind of place where the chandeliers alone probably cost more than most people's cars. I stood outside for a moment in my one good suit, Rachel on one side of me with a leather folder tucked under her arm, Tom on the other, steady in a way he hadn't been since the wedding 2 weeks earlier. Last chance to walk away from this. Rachel said, not because she wanted me to, but because she needed to hear me say I wasn't going to. I'm not walking away. We went inside together. The room was full of exactly the kind of people Diane had spent her whole life trying to impress. Donors in tailored suits, city officials, the quiet, understated wealth that speaks in low voices and expensive perfume. A banner stretched across the far wall read Building Trust, Building Community in elegant gold script, sponsored by a foundation with Diane's name attached as a board member. I almost laughed out loud at the irony of it. We'd made it nearly to the center of the room before Diane spotted me. Her face went rigid for half a second before smoothing back into practiced composure, the same mask she'd worn the morning of the wedding. James! Her voice stayed pleasant, but her eyes were already calculating an exit strategy for me. This is a private event. I know. I won't take much of your time. Security, she said quietly, gesturing toward a man stationed near the entrance. Diane. I kept my voice level, steady, loud enough for the people nearby to hear without actually shouting. Before you have me removed, I'd like 2 minutes. Considering your banner says this evening is about trust and community, I think 2 minutes seems like a fair price. A few heads turned nearby. Conversations quieted slightly, curiosity outweighing politeness. Diane's jaw tightened, but she understood the trap the moment she recognized it. Refusing me now, in front of donors who valued exactly the words printed on that banner, would look worse than simply letting me speak. 2 minutes, she said through her teeth. Rachel handed me the folder. I walked toward the small stage where a projector screen still glowed faintly from an earlier presentation, and I connected my phone to the display before anyone could stop me. The first image appeared, the bank statement, the $40,000 withdrawal, time-stamped the morning of my wedding. 2 weeks ago, I stood at an altar and waited for a bride who never arrived, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent room. What I didn't know that morning was that $40,000 had been withdrawn from our joint wedding account without my knowledge or consent, hours before the ceremony was supposed to begin. Gasps rippled through the crowd, quiet but unmistakable, a single wave moving through the room and settling again. I clicked to the next image, Diane's text message. Tell him whatever you need to, just don't let him see the transfer. This message was sent by Diane Whitmore to her daughter, my former fiancée, on the morning of our wedding. Diane stepped forward, her composure finally cracking at the edges. This is a private family matter, and you have absolutely no right to. I have every right, I said calmly. It was my money too, Diane. And this gala is supposed to be about trust. I clicked to the next document, the second mortgage on Diane's house, $60,000 taken out 3 months earlier, and beside it, Sophie's signed statement laying out the entire plan in careful, deliberate handwriting. Near the back of the room, I saw Emily. I hadn't known she'd be there, but there she was, pale and frozen, staring at the screen like she couldn't quite believe what was happening in front of everyone. Marcus Whitfield stood a few feet away from her, his expression shifting rapidly from confusion to something colder as he read the numbers on the projector. Marcus, I said, turning toward him directly, my voice steady. Did you know the capital Diane brought into your partnership included money taken without consent from my wedding account, along with a second mortgage she never disclosed? Marcus's face went pale. I was told the funds were entirely her personal savings. They weren't, I said simply, gesturing toward the projected documents. He turned toward Diane, his expression hardening into something that looked a great deal like betrayal. Diane, is this true? Diane's mouth opened, then closed, her carefully constructed composure finally beginning to genuinely fracture in front of the exact audience she'd spent years cultivating. Marcus, let me explain. You told me this was clean capital, he said, cutting her off, his voice low but sharp enough to carry. You told me there were no complications. Near the back of the room, Emily finally moved, stepping forward through the crowd toward the small stage, tears streaking down her face. James, she said quietly, her voice barely audible even in the silence. I'm so sorry. I should have told you myself, before any of this. Is it true, Emily? I asked, my voice softer now, no longer performing for the room. All of it? She nodded slowly, her shoulders sinking as something in her seemed to finally give way entirely. Yes. It's true. I didn't leave you because I stopped loving you. I left because I was terrified of losing my mother if I didn't go along with what she needed. I've never known how to say no to her. Not once, in my entire life. You always said reputation was everything to you, Diane. I said quietly, turning back toward her. Let's see what's left of yours after tonight. She didn't respond. There was nothing left for her to say that would matter to anyone in that room. Marcus stepped back from Diane like she'd suddenly become something contagious, addressing the room more than her directly. This partnership is finished. Effective immediately. The room stayed silent for a long moment after that, the kind of silence that follows something irreversible settling into place. Then, slowly, murmuring resumed, donors whispering to each other, several already reaching for their phones, a couple standing near the bar simply staring at Diane with open, undisguised disgust. I stepped down from the small stage, my hands finally steady, the folder closed under my arm. I hadn't come here for revenge exactly. I'd come here for the truth, delivered in the one room Diane couldn't control or quietly bury afterward. As I walked back toward Rachel and Tom, I caught Emily's eyes one final time across the room. There was no anger left in me in that moment, just a strange, quiet sadness for the woman I'd once wanted to spend my life with, a woman who'd spent so long being taught that love was something you traded rather than something you were allowed to simply choose. I didn't stop walking. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth had already said everything that needed saying. The pier in Charleston looked exactly the same as it had 18 months ago, except this time I walked it alone, and for the first time in weeks, that felt okay instead of unbearable. 3 weeks had passed since the gala. Rachel's office had spent most of that time working through the legal aftermath. Fraud charges against Diane were moving forward, built on Sophie's signed statement, the bank documentation, and a mortgage paper trail Diane hadn't expected anyone to trace until it was far too late to matter. The $40,000 had been frozen pending the investigation, and Rachel was confident I'd recover it in full within a few months. You did the hard part already, she told me over coffee the week after the gala. The rest is really just paperwork now. Sophie called not long after that, her voice lighter than I'd heard it in weeks. Diane had followed through on part of her threat, and Sophie's mother had lost her position at the family business within days of the gala. But rather than the disaster Sophie had feared, it had become something closer to freedom. Her mother found a new job within a month, and Sophie herself had started planning her own small events company, no longer tethered to a family whose approval had always come with conditions attached. Feels strange, she admitted during one of our calls. Building something that's actually mine instead of something I'm just borrowing space in. It suits you, I told her, and I meant it. Tom became her first official client, hiring her to help plan a fundraiser for the youth center where he coached on weekends, and something about that felt like a small, quiet kind of justice all its own. Emily reached out exactly once, about 2 weeks after the gala. A short email, careful and hesitant, asking if we could talk. I agreed, mostly out of a curiosity I couldn't quite explain even to myself, and we met at a coffee shop far from anywhere either of us used to frequent together. She looked different somehow, smaller, maybe, or just less performed. The version of her I'd fallen for on that pier 18 months earlier had always seemed so certain of herself. This version looked like someone still learning how to exist outside her mother's shadow for the very first time. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said, turning her cup slowly on the table between us. I don't think I deserve that yet. Maybe not ever. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. Genuinely, completely sorry. I don't hate you, Emily, I said, and it surprised me how true that felt. I just don't need you to understand anymore. I don't need anything from you at all, actually. That's the strange part. She nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what I meant, even though it clearly hurt to hear it said so plainly. For what it's worth, she added quietly, I hope you find someone who never has to guess where they stand with you. I hope you find a version of yourself that doesn't need anyone's permission to be happy, I said. We didn't hug when we left. We didn't promise to stay in touch. It felt like the right kind of ending, not bitter, not warm, just finished, the way certain chapters need to close cleanly before you can start writing the next one honestly. That brought me back here, to this pier, on a quiet Saturday morning with the wind coming off the water and gulls circling somewhere overhead. I thought about the man who knelt right here 18 months ago, so certain that love was something simple, something you just had to find the right person to share. I didn't resent that version of myself anymore. I just understood him differently now, with a clarity that only comes from watching something you trusted completely fall apart in front of you. Some people spend a long time planning your downfall without you ever noticing the pattern until it's already happened. The only thing you actually control is what comes after, whether you rebuild something honest, or spend the rest of your life waiting for someone else's approval to feel whole again. I chose the first one. I didn't lose a wedding that day at the altar. I lost a version of myself who needed everyone's approval to feel whole, and honestly, looking back now, that might have been the better trade all along. If this story hit close to home, tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe the truth always finds its way out eventually, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it, type family betrayal verdict before you go.